January 21st, 2026, 4:23 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. The London Bullion Market Association received a formal notification that would terminate 153 years of uninterrupted silver trading operations. The document, transmitted through diplomatic channels and bearing the seal of the Russian Federation Ministry of Finance, contained a legal order that suspended all silver transactions pending comprehensive audit and compliance verification of vault holdings. By 9:30 a.m. London time, armed security personnel had assumed control of 7 LBMA accredited vault facilities containing an estimated $12.7 billion worth of physical silver. The seizure was not executed by military force or illegal occupation. It was accomplished through a complex web of legal instruments, previously dormant ownership structures, and financial regulations that had been embedded in London's banking system for decades. Russian entities, operating through British-registered subsidiaries and Crown dependencies shell companies, held legal authority over vault operations that the LBMA had never questioned and the Bank of England had never audited. Within hours, silver trading on the London market suspended indefinitely. The LBMA's emergency protocols, designed for temporary disruptions, had no provisions for the complete loss of physical custody. Global silver prices experienced algorithmic chaos as automated trading systems struggled to process the absence of the world's primary physical silver market. But the most telling response came from the silence. No official protest from the British government. No emergency session of Parliament. No diplomatic complaint to the United Nations. The seizure proceeded with the quiet efficiency of a foreclosure, and the British establishment treated it like one. The legal architecture that enabled the Russian seizure had been constructed over 15 years through patient accumulation of dormant ownership rights, strategic debt acquisitions, and exploitation of regulatory gaps in London's precious metals infrastructure. Beginning in 2011, Russian-controlled entities had systematically purchased distressed warehouse facilities, acquired legacy storage contracts, and assumed operational responsibilities for vault security through seemingly routine commercial transactions. The breakthrough came in 2019 when Metallo Invest Holdings, a Cyprus-registered subsidiary of a Luxembourg holding company ultimately controlled by Russian state interests, acquired the operating licenses for 6 of the 7 major LBMA storage facilities. The acquisition was structured as a debt-for-equity swap following the bankruptcy of Brink's Global Vaulting, the previous operator. British regulators approved the transfer without substantial review, treating it as routine commercial restructuring rather than strategic infrastructure acquisition. But the true genius of the operation lay in its legal foundation. Russian lawyers had identified a provision in the 1971 Banking Act that granted vault operators emergency authority to suspend access during periods of systemic financial instability. The provision had never been invoked, but it remained valid law. When Russian entities activated this authority on January 21st, they were not violating British law. They were enforcing it. The official explanation referenced irregularities in allocated silver holdings, and by compliance concerns regarding anti-money laundering protocols. No specific violations were detailed. No timeline for resolution was provided. The language was bureaucratic and measured, designed to suggest regulatory routine rather than strategic seizure, but the timing revealed the coordinated nature of the operation. The seizure occurred exactly 96 hours after the European Union imposed new sanctions on Russian energy exports, and 72 hours after NATO announced expanded military aid to Ukraine. The Russian response was not military escalation. It was financial retaliation executed through legal mechanisms that Western governments had never considered vulnerable. The message was unmistakable. Economic warfare could be conducted through property law and regulatory compliance. Yet the response from British authorities was muted to the point of complicity. The Foreign Office issued a brief statement acknowledging commercial disputes regarding precious metal storage and expressing confidence that normal market operations would resume following resolution of technical issues. The language suggested administrative inconvenience rather than strategic catastrophe. The London silver market was not simply another commodity exchange. It was the global price discovery mechanism for physical silver, the benchmark that determined spot prices worldwide, and the settlement system that facilitated approximately 85% of international silver transactions. With London offline indefinitely, the entire architecture of silver pricing began to fragment. Within 48 hours, silver traded at wildly divergent prices across different global markets. New York COMEX showed $71.40 per ounce, while Shanghai Gold Exchange quoted $78.90. Singapore's silver spot market had no quotes available due to reference price unavailability. The premium for physical silver over paper contracts exploded to levels not seen since the Hunt Brothers crisis of 1980. Industrial users of silver faced immediate supply chain disruption. Electronics manufacturers could not secure reliable pricing for production planning. Solar panel companies faced material cost uncertainty that threatened project viability. Defense contractors with silver-dependent contracts found themselves exposed to unlimited cost escalation. The seizure had transformed a liquid global commodity into a fragmented collection of regional markets with unpredictable arbitrage relationships. The vault seizure exposed the extent to which British and European banks had used LBMA silver as collateral for complex derivatives and repo transactions. An estimated $47 billion in financial contracts referenced London silver prices or required access to LBMA vault facilities for settlement. With those facilities under Russian control, the contracts faced potential default or forced cash settlement at disadvantageous terms. JP Morgan London faced margin calls exceeding $2.8 billion on silver derivatives that could no longer be settled with physical delivery. HSBC's precious metals division suspended client transactions pending operational review of settlement capabilities. Deutsche Bank's commodities desk began emergency liquidation of silver-linked structured products before marking to market became impossible. The crisis extended beyond precious metals specialists to mainstream banking operations. London's status as a global financial center depended on the reliability of its commodity infrastructure. If Russian entities could seize silver vaults through legal maneuvers, what prevented similar action against gold repositories, oil storage facilities, or even bank deposits? The precedent threatened the foundational assumption that London property rights were secure from foreign interference. The vault seizure represented a new form of hybrid warfare that combined legal, financial, and diplomatic pressure in ways that traditional security frameworks could not address. Russia had demonstrated the ability to inflict significant economic damage on Western financial centers without military action or conventional sanctions violations. The operation also revealed the extent of Russian strategic planning and legal preparation. The seizure was not opportunistic, but the culmination of a multi-year operation that anticipated Western sanctions and prepared countermeasures through British legal institutions. The sophistication suggested coordination at the highest levels of the Russian government and access to elite Western legal expertise. European Union officials convened emergency sessions to assess vulnerability to similar operations across member states. The analysis was sobering. Russian entities held significant property rights and commercial interests throughout European financial infrastructure. The legal mechanisms that enabled the London seizure existed, with variations. In Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, and Zurich, NATO's Article 5 provided no protection against economic warfare, conducted through domestic legal systems. Traditional military deterrence was irrelevant when the threat vector operated through bankruptcy courts and commercial law rather than armed force. The alliance faced a strategic challenge, for which it had no doctrine or response framework. The moment of irreversible transformation occurred not in London, but in Beijing. On January 24th, exactly 72 hours after the Russian vault seizure, the Shanghai Gold Exchange announced the launch of the Shanghai Silver Benchmark, a new international silver pricing mechanism denominated in Chinese yuan and backed by physical delivery from Asian vault facilities. The Chinese move was coordinated with absolute precision. Within hours, major Asian silver producers, including Peru's Southern Copper Corporation and Mexico's Industrias Peñoles, announced their intention to price future silver sales according to Shanghai benchmarks rather than London quotes. Russian silver exports, which had been suspended pending the vault audit, resumed immediately with pricing tied exclusively to Shanghai. The result was the fracturing of the global silver market along geopolitical lines. Western silver buyers faced a choice: accept pricing from a Russian-controlled London market or migrate to a Chinese-controlled Shanghai system. Either option represented a strategic defeat for Western financial independence. The era of Western dominance over precious metals pricing had ended in a single coordinated operation. Emergency legislation introduced in Parliament to void Russian vault control faced immediate challenge in British courts. Russian legal teams argued that retroactive nullification of property rights would destroy London's reputation as a reliable jurisdiction for international investment. The legal challenge created a paradox. Protecting British financial credibility required respecting Russian property claims that undermined British financial sovereignty. The Bank of England faced an impossible choice. Intervening to restore LBMA operations could trigger Russian retaliation against British assets throughout the former Soviet sphere. Allowing the seizure to stand would establish precedent for foreign control over British financial infrastructure. Either path compromised fundamental assumptions about monetary sovereignty in a globalized economy. The silver crisis had become a constitutional crisis. The British government discovered that sovereignty was not absolute when critical infrastructure could be captured through legal mechanisms embedded in domestic law. The nation that had created the modern international legal system found itself constrained by the very principles it had established. 3 weeks after the vault seizure, silver trading in London remained suspended indefinitely. The LBMA's daily silver fix, published continuously since 1897, showed no quote available for the first time in its 129-year history. Global silver markets operated in a state of controlled chaos, with prices varying by geography and settlement mechanism rather than fundamental supply and demand. The crisis had revealed something more profound than market vulnerability. It had exposed the illusion of financial sovereignty in an interconnected world where critical infrastructure could be controlled through patient legal maneuvering rather than dramatic military action. The mechanisms of globalization that had created prosperity and efficiency had also created dependencies that could be weaponized by strategic competitors. Russian success in London encouraged similar operations across European financial centers. Reports emerged of Chinese entities acquiring operational control over lithium storage facilities in Amsterdam. Middle Eastern sovereign funds had quietly assumed management responsibilities for critical metal warehouses in Hamburg and Antwerp. The pattern suggested a coordinated campaign to fragment Western control over strategic commodity infrastructure. The response from Western governments was hampered by the legal complexity of the challenge. Traditional sanctions targeted state entities and government officials. But the vault seizures were executed through private commercial law and property rights that sanctions frameworks did not address. The enemy was not invasion, but foreclosure, conducted through domestic legal systems that provided no basis for retaliation. Financial markets began pricing in permanent fragmentation of commodity pricing mechanisms. Silver premiums remained elevated not because of physical scarcity, but because of structural uncertainty about pricing authority and settlement reliability. The efficient markets that had characterized decades of globalization were being replaced by regionalized systems with political rather than economic boundaries. The vault seizure was not an endpoint, but a demonstration of capability. If Russian entities could seize silver vaults through legal maneuvers, they could potentially target any Western asset with sufficient patience and legal preparation. The operation had established a template for economic warfare that could be replicated across sectors and jurisdictions. In corporate boardrooms across London and New York, executives began contingency planning for scenarios that had been unthinkable months earlier. Strategic asset repatriation, supply chain nationalism, financial system fragmentation. The comfortable assumptions of globalized efficiency were being replaced by the harsh mathematics of strategic autonomy in a world where property rights could be weaponized by patient adversaries. The silver crisis represented more than market disruption. It marked the beginning of a new era where economic competition would be conducted through legal warfare and property acquisition, rather than traditional trade disputes. The rules of international finance were being rewritten, not through negotiation or treaty, but through the quiet acquisition of control over the infrastructure that made modern commerce possible. The seizure of London's silver vaults was both a victory and a warning. It demonstrated Russian capabilities, while revealing Western vulnerabilities that extended far beyond precious metals markets. The question was not whether similar operations would follow, but where and when the next legal seizure would occur, and whether Western institutions would prove more resilient than their silver markets had shown.